For the past 32 days, the world has been watching one choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. 21 miles of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, if of the world's oil closed, locked. Oil at $110 a barrel, gas at $4 in America, markets shaking, economies bleeding. And everyone said, at least the Red Sea is still open, at least ships can still go through Bab el-Mandeb, at least the Suez Canal route is still available, at least there is one exit left. That exit just got a missile fired at it. On March 28th, 4 days ago, the Houthis of Yemen officially entered this war. They fired ballistic missiles at Israel. They launched cruise missiles and drones on the second day. And their deputy information minister made a statement that should have stopped the world cold. He said, "Closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is among our options." Let me explain what this means, because I do not think the full weight of this has landed for most people yet. If the Bab el-Mandeb closes even partially, we will not just have one choke point in crisis, we will have two simultaneously. The Strait of Hormuz controls 20% of the world's oil. Bab el-Mandeb controls another 10 to 12% of the world's seaborne oil trade and 25% of global container shipping. Together, these two straits are the jugular veins of the global economy. Iran controls one. The Houthis, backed by Iran, are sitting on top of the other. Today, we are going to break down exactly how we got here, what the Houthis, why this changes everything, and what happens to the world if both choke points close at the same time. Buckle up. This is the biggest escalation of this entire war, and almost nobody is explaining it properly. Before we get into what just happened, we need to understand who the Houthis actually are, because without that context, the rest of this story does not make sense. The Houthis, formerly known as Ansar Allah, are an armed political and military movement that has controlled large parts of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a since 2014. They emerged from a religious and political movement in northern Yemen, rooted in Zid Shia Islam. Over years of civil war, they defeated the internationally recognized Yemeni government and became the de facto rulers of the most populated parts of the country. They are part of what Iran calls its axis of resistance. This is Iran's network of proxy forces spread across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, various Shia militias in Iraq, and the southeast in Yemen. Each group operates with some level of autonomy, but all of them receive weapons, money, training, and strategic direction from Thran. What makes the southeast uniquely dangerous is their geography. Yemen sits at the southwestern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. Its western coastline runs along the Red Sea. At the very bottom of that coastline, where the Red Sea narrows before opening into the Gulf of Aden, lies the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Houthis control that coastline. They have anti-ship missiles, they have drones, they have sea mines, and they have already shown the world what they can do. From November 2023 until January 2025, during Israel's war with Gaza, the Houthis launched one of the most disruptive maritime campaigns in modern history. They attacked over 178 vessels, they sank multiple ships, they killed sailors, they fired missiles and drones at commercial shipping, passing through the Bab el-Mandeb. The result was that Red Sea traffic collapsed. The Suez Canal, which normally handles 10% of global maritime trade and 40% of containers ship traffic, saw passage numbers fall by 70% at the peak of the crisis. Major shipping companies stopped using the route entirely. Ships were forced to go around the southern tip of Africa, adding 11,000 extra nautical miles, 10 extra days of travel, and $1 million in extra fuel costs to every voyage. The Russell Group estimated that goods worth around $1 trillion were disrupted by Houthi attacks from October 2023 to May 2024 alone. And the Houthis did all of that during a period when the Strait of Hormuz was fully open. Global oil prices were relatively stable, and American forces were actively bombing Houthi positions in Yemen. After spending $1 billion on that campaign, the Trump administration declared a ceasefire with the Houthis in 2025. The Houthis agreed, but they made no concessions. They kept their weapons. They kept their coastline. They were ready to go again at any moment. That moment is now. On March 28th, exactly 1 month into the US-Israel war against Iran, the Houthis officially entered the conflict. Houthi military spokesperson Brigadier General Yahya Sari appeared on the group's Al-Mazar satellite television and announced the first military operation. The Houthis had launched a barrage of ballistic missiles targeting what Sari described as sensitive Israeli military sites in southern Israel. Air raid sirens went off across Beersheba. Israel's military confirmed it intercepted the missile. No casualties were reported on that first strike, but within 24 hours there was a second operation, this time cruise missiles and drones. Israel said those were intercepted too. Then on the same day as these missile strikes, the Deputy Information Minister of the Houthis, Mohammed Mansour, spoke to local media. He said directly and clearly, "We are conducting this battle in stages and closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is among our options." High Deputy Pilot Bureau member Mohammed al-Bakidi added that the group was considering a full naval blockade, specifically targeting vessels belonging to what he called aggressor countries involved in military actions against Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, and Palestine. The Houthi leader himself, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, had already said weeks earlier in a televised speech on March 5th, "Our fingers are on the trigger at any moment should developments warrant it." That trigger has now been pulled. The Houthis also officially declared that their operations would continue, in their own words, until the aggression against all resistance fronts ceases. This is not a limited response. This is an open-ended commitment to remain in this war until Israel stops attacking Iran, Lebanon, Gaza, and everywhere else. And they made one more statement that reveals the full scope of what they are threatening. Sari said that the Houthis' fingers are on the trigger for direct military intervention if other countries join operations against Iran, if the Red Sea is used to conduct attacks, or if there is further escalation against Iran. Think about what that last point means. If the United States uses the Red Sea to attack Iran, the Houthis are threatening to shut down the Red Sea itself. Iran's own unnamed military officials told the semi-official Tasnim news agency that Iran could open a new front at Bab el-Mandeb if attacks are carried out on Iranian territory or its islands. The coordination between Thran and the Houthis is explicit. The Houthi Deputy Information Minister confirmed it himself. He said that we are in joint coordination with our brothers in Iran, Lebanon, and Iraq. This is not the acting independently. This is Iran activating its southern proxy at the moment it chooses in a coordinated strategic move. To understand why this is so catastrophic, you need to understand the geography of global trade. So let me walk you through it. Picture the world from above. There are two water routes connecting the east and the west without going around Africa. The first is through the Persian Gulf, past Iran, through the Strait of Hormuz into the Arabian Sea around to your destination. The second is through the Red Sea, past Yemen, through Bab el-Mandeb into the Gulf of Aden and then into the Indian Ocean. These are not luxury routes. They are not alternative routes. They are the primary routes through which the modern global economy moves. Oil from the Gulf, manufactured goods from Asia, food from multiple continents, electronics, medicine, raw materials, everything. Now let us look at the numbers, because the numbers are the story. The Strait of Hormuz, currently controlled by Iran, handles approximately 20% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's liquefied natural gas. It has been effectively closed since the start of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th. Over 3,000 vessels are currently stranded. Oil prices have risen 57% since the war began. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, currently threatened by the Houthis, handles approximately 10 to 12% of global seaborne oil trade. It also handles roughly 25% of global container shipping, because every ship going from Asia to Europe via the Suez Canal must pass through it. It handles 8% of global LNG trade. It was already handling the emergency rerouting of Saudi oil that could no longer go through Hormuz. Let me explain that last point carefully because it is critical. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, Saudi Arabia did not stop exporting oil. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter, shipping close to 10 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline called the East-West Pipeline, sometimes called the Petroline, that runs from its eastern oil fields across the country to oil export terminals on its western Red Sea coast, particularly the port of Yanbu. This pipeline can carry about 5 million barrels per day. Since the Hormuz closure, Saudi Arabia has been routing as much oil as possible through this pipeline and out of Yanbu, through the Red Sea, through Bab el-Mandeb and into global markets. Around 30 tankers near Yanbu are currently within Houthi missile range at any given time. According to reports from The Times, analyst Gregory Brew from the Eurasia Group put it plainly. He said there are a large number of tankers now making the Red Sea transit to pick up Saudi crude. He said this is very important for oil markets because it relieves pressure from the total shutdown of the Persian Gulf. And then he said if the Houthis attacked Yanbu, and if they did enough to disrupt exports from the terminal, you are looking at a disruption of 7 million barrels per day. 7 million barrels per day, on top of the Hormuz closure. And it gets worse. Bab el-Mandeb is also the route through which Suez Canal traffic flows. The Suez Canal handles 10% of global maritime trade and 40% of container shipping. During the Gaza war, when the Houthis were attacking Red Sea shipping, Suez Canal traffic fell by 70%. Ships were diverted around Africa. The global supply chain creaked and groaned under the strain. If both Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb are significantly disrupted simultaneously, there is no easy detour left. Ships go around Africa, adding weeks and millions of dollars to every journey. Energy prices go even higher, food prices go higher, inflation goes higher, and the global economy moves one step closer to recession. Cambridge University Middle East specialist Elizabeth Kendall told Al Jazeera that if Bab el-Mandeb is blocked alongside Hormuz, it would create a nightmare scenario. Her exact words, if you have restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz at the same time as restrictions are escalating in the Bab el-Mandeb, then you really will disrupt, if not trade, toward Europe. This is a question that many analysts have been asking, and the answer reveals a great deal about Iran's strategic thinking. The Houthis did not join this war immediately on February 28th, when the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. For a full month, they made threatening statements. They declared their support for Iran. Their leader gave speeches, but they did not fire. Why? There are two main explanations, and both are likely true simultaneously. The first is that the Houthis were waiting for an Iranian signal. Multiple sources reported that the Houthis were on full alert from the start of the war, but were holding back on Tehran's instruction. Iran was playing a very specific game with its proxy forces. It wanted to deploy them at the right moment in the right sequence for maximum strategic effect. In the first month of the war, Iran was testing American resolve with its own weapons, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and the Hormuz closure. It was using Hezbollah in Lebanon to keep Israel tied down on a second front. The Iraqi militias were feeding information about US troop positions. The Houthis were being kept in reserve like a card that had not yet been played. Senior analyst Ahmed Nagy from the International Crisis Group said directly that the healthy decision to stay out of the war initially was a calculated move coordinated with Iran. This was not timidity, this was strategy. The second explanation is that the Southeast had their own domestic considerations. They have been fighting a civil war in Yemen for over a decade. They were in the middle of a fragile ceasefire situation with Saudi Arabia. They did not want to open multiple fronts simultaneously. They needed to consolidate their position on the ground inside Yemen before extending outward. And notably, while they stayed quiet internationally, they were not passive at home. The Middle East Forum documented that the Houthis were aggressively advancing along the southwest coast of Yemen, specifically toward the Tiaima coast near the Bab el-Mandeb. They were moving toward elevated positions like Jabal Ross, which gives commanding views over the roads leading to the strait. They were positioning themselves on the ground to have better physical control over the choke point before they threatened it publicly. In other words, they spent the first month of the Iran war getting into position. Now they have fired the opening shots. Foreign policy analyst Keith Johnson put it in terms that should make everyone uncomfortable. He wrote that the Houthis do not necessarily need to shut down Bab el-Mandeb completely to affect energy markets. Even limited or intermittent disruptions in the Red Sea, he said, could have outsized effects on energy markets, particularly given how sensitive current conditions already are. The Houthis know this. They are not trying to sink every ship. They are trying to create enough threat and uncertainty that insurers pull out, shipping companies reroute, and the economic pressure on America and Israel multiplies. That strategy worked in 2023 and 2024. And now they are doing it again with a Hormuz closure already in place that makes every additional disruption exponentially more damaging. Here is what I want you to understand about what is happening at the strategic level, because this is the part that most news coverage is missing. Iran is not just fighting a war. Iran is building a siege. Think about it from Thran's perspective. The United States and Israel launched a devastating air campaign on February 28th. Iran's air defenses were degraded. Its navy was badly hit. Its nuclear facilities were struck. Its original supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed in the opening strikes. A new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has taken over, and Iran's leadership has been under enormous pressure. But Iran has a strategy for this kind of pressure, and that strategy is economic pain. Iran cannot defeat the United States or Israel in a direct military contest. Iran knows this, but Iran can make the cost of continuing this war so high and so widespread that domestic and international political pressure forces America to find an exit. The Strait of Hormuz closure was the first move. It took 20% of the world's oil off the global market. Oil shot up from $70 to over $110 a barrel. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon. Goldman Sachs is projecting a 2027 recession risk. The economic damage is real, and it is already hitting ordinary Americans in their wallets. The IRGC threatening American tech companies is the second move. A direct threat to civilian economic infrastructure. Attacks on Gulf state oil infrastructure are the third move. Iran has been hitting desalination plants, power facilities, and oil terminals across Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. This keeps Gulf states destabilized and unable to fully support American operations. And now the Houthis entering from Yemen and threatening Bab el-Mandeb is the fourth move. Iran is simultaneously squeezing the world at Hormuz, destabilizing the Gulf states, opening a missile and drone front Lebanon through Hezbollah, activating Iraqi militias, and now threatening to close Bab el-Mandeb through the Houthis. This is a multi-front economic siege, and it is designed specifically to outlast American political will. Iranian Foreign Minister Arashi said Iran is prepared for at least 6 months of war. He said it does not matter what deadlines the enemy sets. Trump says the war ends in 2 to 3 weeks. Iran says 6 months minimum. One of them is wrong. And looking at Iran's strategic position right now, with 2 choke points under pressure, with the global economy bleeding with US allies refusing to help reopen Hormuz, and with the Houthis now in the fight, it is not obvious that the side that is wrong is Iran. The Houthis' entry into this war also creates a serious military problem for the United States that has not been fully discussed. The USS Gerald R. Ford, one of America's most powerful aircraft carriers, was recently sent to Crete for repairs after sustaining wear from the high operational tempo of this war. When and if the Ford is sent back into the region, the question becomes, where does it go? If the carrier enters the Red Sea, it faces exactly the same threat environment that nearly overwhelmed the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in 2024, and the USS Harry S. Truman during the 2025 bombing campaign against the Houthis. In 2024, American carriers faced one of the most intense running naval battles the US Navy has experienced since World War II, flying drone defense sorties around the clock, firing expensive Patriot and SM-2 interceptors at cheap Houthi drones that cost a fraction of the price. It was operationally brutal and financially unsustainable. The Houthis survived that campaign. Trump spent $1 billion bombing them and then declared a ceasefire that changed nothing. The Houthis kept their weapons and kept their coast, Now they are back, and now crucially, the US military is already stretched thin. The Iran war has burned through Patriot missile stockpiles at an extraordinary rate. The Pentagon is considering diverting Ukraine's Patriot missiles to the Gulf just to keep up. Adding a full Red Sea naval campaign against the Houthis on top of the existing Iran war would require resources and munitions that the United States military does not currently have in abundance. The Houthis understand this arithmetic. Their goal is not to destroy American ships. Their goal is to add another front that stretches American military resources and political will even thinner. Al Jazeera's Yemen correspondent described Bab el-Mandeb as the Houthis ace. They will play it carefully, not all at once. They will fire enough missiles to scare shipping away from the Red Sea. They will create uncertainty. They will force insurance rates for Red Sea shipping to skyrocket, which happens even without direct hits because insurers react to threat levels. And they will wait to see how America responds. If America bombs Yemen again, the Houthis escalate. If America does not, shipping companies retreat from the Red Sea route anyway out of caution. Either way, Bab el-Mandeb becomes less usable, and Saudi Arabia's emergency oil export route through Yanbu gets threatened. Let us talk about Saudi Arabia specifically, because it is sitting in the most uncomfortable position of any country in this entire war. Saudi Arabia has one of the most important economies in the world, but almost entirely dependent on oil exports. Before this war, the majority of its oil exports went through the Strait of Hormuz. When Hormuz closed, Saudi Arabia activated its emergency response, the East-West pipeline and the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea. Saudi Arabia has been pumping approximately 5 million barrels per day through that pipeline and out of Yanbu since the war began. This is the only thing keeping Saudi oil reaching global markets. This is also the single alternative route that was reducing global oil price pressure. Without Yanbu, there is no Saudi oil in global markets at all. Now the Houthis are threatening the Red Sea. Yanbu is in the Red Sea. Those 30 tankers sitting near Yanbu, waiting to pick up Saudi crude, are within Houthi missile range. The Atlantic Council pointed out that if the Houthis resume attacks against Red Sea shipping, it could threaten Saudi Arabia's Houthi movement. Saudi Arabia and the Houthis have been in a fragile peace arrangement since 2023. Saudi Arabia has been trying to extract itself from the Yemen civil war. Now that ceasefire is under enormous pressure because the Houthis have joined the Iran war and are threatening Saudi exports. If the Houthis attack Yanbu, or the tankers loading from it, Saudi Arabia faces a choice: retaliate and re-enter the Yemen civil war. It has been trying to leave or absorb the attacks and watch its oil export revenue collapse. There is no good option for the United States. This matters because Saudi Arabia is the primary replacement source of oil that the world has been counting on while Hormuz is closed. If Yanbu is disrupted, that safety valve disappears and there is then no alternative route large enough to replace what Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb together carry. Let me do the math on what a dual choke point closure actually means for the world economy, because I want you to understand this in concrete terms. Currently, with Hormuz effectively closed, oil is at $110 a barrel. The global economy is being described as facing the largest supply disruption in the history of oil markets. Europe is facing stagflation. Emerging markets are facing currency crisis. Humanitarian operations across Africa are being pushed to a breaking point because fuel costs have exploded. That is with one choke point in crisis. Now add Bab el-Mandeb. Hormuz handles 20% of global oil. Bab el-Mandeb handles 10 to 12%. Together, they account for roughly 30% of global seaborne oil trade. There is no realistic alternative route large enough to absorb all of that volume simultaneously. Pipelines exist, but they have limited capacity. Overland routes have even more limited capacity. The oil that moves through these straits moves through them because there is no other way to move it at the volumes required. If both close simultaneously, analysts estimate oil could reach $150 to $200 per barrel. Some have suggested even higher in a severe sustained scenario. Gasoline in the United States, already at $4 nationally and near $6 in California, would spike further. Every product that uses plastic, which is made from petroleum, goes up in price. Fertilizer prices go up because fertilizers are made from natural gas, much of which moves through these straits. Food prices go up because fertilizer prices went up. The cost of everything goes up. Suez Canal traffic, already disrupted during the Gaza war, collapses again. Container shipping is rerouted around Africa. Delivery times for goods from Asia to Europe stretch from 25 days to 40 or 45 days. Just-in-time supply chains, which have no buffer for that kind of disruption, break down. Manufacturers run out of components. Car production stops. Electronics are delayed. Medicines are delayed. The European Central Bank warned last week that the current Iran war alone risks pushing major European economies into stagflation. Adding Bab el-Mandeb to the equation pushes that from risk into near certainty for developing nations. This is not an economic inconvenience. This is a humanitarian catastrophe. Countries that import their food, import their fuel, and have limited foreign currency reserves are facing the possibility of shortages that create famine-level conditions. The International Rescue Committee has already said that the current crisis is pushing humanitarian operations to a breaking point. A dual choke point closure would not push humanitarian operations to a breaking point. It would push them past it. Let me bring this to a close with the question that every government in the world is asking behind closed doors tonight. Is there a scenario where both choke points close? The honest answer is yes. That scenario is possible. Whether it happens depends on decisions that will be made in the next 2 to 4 weeks. If Trump orders strikes on Iranian power plants as he has threatened before the April 6th deadline, Iran may signal the Houthis to escalate. If the US or Israel strikes Houthi territory in Yemen, the Houthis will escalate. If no deal is reached and the war continues into its 3rd month, the probability of further Houthi action rises with every passing week. The Houthis have already said that closing Bab el-Mandeb is among their options. They have said their fingers are on the trigger. They have confirmed coordination with Thoron. They have been advancing militarily along the Yemen coast to improve their position. Every piece on the chessboard is moving in the direction of escalation. What stands between the current situation and a full dual choke point crisis is a deal. Some form of agreement, even a temporary one that gives Iran enough to stop fighting without conceding everything. That deal has been elusive for 32 days. Iran says there are no negotiations. Trump says talks are going well. Someone is lying or deeply mistaken. Cambridge University's Elizabeth Kendall said a dual choke point blockade would be a nightmare scenario. Foreign policy called it the nightmare scenario that could push oil prices beyond anything we have seen in the modern era. We are not there yet, but for the first time since this war began, both straits are under simultaneous threat. That is not a coincidence. It is a strategy, Iran's strategy, and it is working in the sense that the economic pressure on the United States and its allies is rising faster than the military pressure on Iran. The world needed this war to have a fast, clean ending. Instead, it is getting wider, messier, and more dangerous with every passing week. Watch what happens in Yemen in the next 7 days. Because the next escalation is not coming from Thran. It is coming from the Red Sea coast of Yemen. And when it does, this war will enter a phase that nobody has fully prepared for. Thank you for watching. Share this video if it gave you a clearer picture of what is happening. Subscribe for updates as this situation develops. This story is not finished.